Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a question that I know has probably crossed your mind. How do organizations really become learning institutions?
hmm
You've likely sat through your share of corporate training sessions, right? This deep dive is about looking beyond those typical programs to understand the core principles that drive genuine learning and development within an organization.
Exactly. We've got a document here called Building a Learning Institution,
Yeah.
and, well, it pulls from a lot of interesting research and real-world examples.
Oh.
Our goal today is really to extract the key insights and, practical takeaways from this source, so you can get a clearer picture of what it takes to cultivate effective learning and growth in whatever organizational context you're part of.
Yes, can I talk into the video and then you can help me to put in. I really impressed with the work rules number 9 about building a learning institution. That's things I have much experience on hands-on experience with learning in
That money and time
the
seem to
companies I've
disappear
worked
without
for.
trace.
Right.
Since learn computer
The
in
document
Taiping
suggests
Shoe
that a core
company,
issue
and
is
then
often the
after
fundamental lack of
and then
any
in
real
one
way
bank
to
project,
measure
I
what's
also
actually being
learned
learned or any lasting
evaluate
change.
M&Es, monitoring and evaluation,
Minutes a week just
and
watching
then
broadcasts is going to earn you a black belt.
Not
other
like
project
Or,
also,
as the source puts
organization
it in a way
later
that
on,
really
I
stuck
learned a
with me,
lot.
spending 30 minutes a week fiddling with pancake recipes isn't going to magically turn you into a cordon bleu chef.
Right.
We all know intuitively that consistent, focused effort and actual application are what truly matter. So despite the massive investment, the core issue isn't necessarily a lack of resources, but perhaps a lack of understanding of how learning truly works and how to measure its impact.
That's a crucial point. And it leads us right into our first area of discussion. The fundamental challenges with a lot of traditional corporate learning. The source makes a really interesting comparison here to formal education. So back in 2009, 2010, the U.S. invested roughly $638 billion in public education from pre-K through high school. That's about 4 times what corporations were spending on learning then.
And here's the kicker. Those public schools were providing significantly more hours of instruction per learner.
Right, way more time.
So you spend all those years in formal schooling, presumably soaking up a ton of information, and then companies pour billions into corporate learning. It makes you wonder, especially when you think about your own school days, why there's this huge corporate investment with often such limited returns.
Well, the source argues pretty directly that corporate learning often misses the mark because it's just not targeted enough. The delivery isn't always effective, and critically, the impact isn't adequately measured. It's often this kind of broad brush approach when what's really needed is something much more precise and focused.
Which brings us perfectly to the concept of deliberate practice. The source uses a really compelling example here. Damon Dunn. Back in the mid-90s, he was a student at Stanford who, well, he went on to become a professional football player and then a successful real estate developer. Talk about a diverse skill set.
It's fascinating, isn't it? And what's particularly interesting is the story about Dunn practicing his golf swing.
Right, the golf story.
The source recounts how he would relentlessly hit golf balls at the driving range, even in the dark and pouring rain, long after everyone else had packed up and left. It wasn't just, casually hitting balls. It was a very methodical and intensely focused effort.
But not just repetition, but focused repetition.
Exactly. Effective learning isn't about passive consumption. It's about active, focused effort with constant feedback, basically,
Yeah.
treating skill development like a science.
And this really connects with the work of Kay Anders Ericsson, a psychology professor whose research really changed how we understand expertise.
Erickson's work is key here.
He found that becoming an expert isn't just about the total amount of time you spend learning something. The crucial factor is how you spend that time.
Precisely. Erickson's research showed that experts in all sorts of fields, think violinists, surgeons, athletes, even spelling bee champions, they all engaged in what he called deliberate practice.
Okay.
This involves intentionally repeating very specific small actions, getting immediate feedback on those actions, constantly correcting and actively experimenting. It's a very targeted and iterative process.
That's so different from just going through the motions. I think back to my high school swim team. We'd just swim lap after lap, day after day. There wasn't much specific feedback on our technique. No real targeted drills to correct flaws. It was a lot of repetition, sure,
Mm-hmm.
but probably not a lot of effective improvement for many of us.
Right. It just highlights how just putting in the hours doesn't guarantee results.
Definitely not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the contrast our source draws. It then brings in the example of McKinsey and Company's approach to training their consultants. It wasn't just sitting in lectures. No, it involved intense role-playing of client interactions, videotaping those sessions, providing detailed feedback on what worked and what didn't, and then repeating the exercises.
That sounds intense.
It was this cycle of focused practice and immediate correction that apparently made their training so effective.
This really underscores the idea that we need to shift our focus from the time spent in training to the actual changes in behavior that result.
Yes.
The source points out that so many organizations really just focus on the number of training hours completed, almost as if ticking that box automatically means improvement. Think about your own workplace as the focus on attendance or actual skill development.
And that's often where things break down, isn't it? The source touches on the limitations of systems like tenure-based salary increases in teaching, where there isn't always a clear connection between improved performance or continuous learning and career progression.
Right, like you get paid more just for sticking around longer.
Exactly. They give the example of a long-serving American history teacher who, despite years of experience, hadn't really updated their content or teaching methods in decades. So repetition without feedback led to stagnation.
But the source also gives us examples of a better approach. They mention Frank Wagner's work at Google.
Google comes up a lot.
Before any client meeting, he would intentionally ask his team very specific questions. Things like, what are your specific goals for this meeting? Or how do you anticipate each client will respond to our proposal?
So prompting them to think ahead.
Yeah, it wasn't about him giving the answers. It was about prompting critical thinking and learning from each and every interaction.
What's key there, especially as you think about implementing this in your own context, is the emphasis on reflection and planning for the future.
Okay.
The source emphasizes that ideally, every learning experience should conclude with immediate feedback and a clear plan for what to approach differently next time. This is what really makes the learning stick and leads to tangible improvements.
Now, this next point really struck me. The idea of building a faculty of internal experts.
Ah, yes, using your own people.
The source really challenges this common assumption that we always need to bring in expensive external consultants or trainers. It argues that often the most effective teachers are already within the organization. Have you found that to be true in your experience?
Oh, definitely. It's a really powerful idea. The source introduces the concept of the local maximum in teaching.
Local maximum.
Think of it as the go-to person in your company for a specific skill or area of knowledge. They might not have formal training credentials, but they possess the deepest practical understanding of how things actually work here within your unique context and facing your specific challenges.
So they know the real deal.
Exactly. Their expertise is often incredibly relevant and immediately applicable.
They provide a really compelling hypothetical example.
Yeah.
Imagine your top salesperson, someone who consistently brings in, say, $1 million in sales every year, training 10 other salespeople who are currently averaging $500,000. Even if that top performer spends just a few weeks each year teaching specific, actionable selling skills, the potential for significant revenue growth is enormous compared to generic one-off training or, well, no training at all.
And the source even includes a graph illustrating this potential.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Over an 8-year period, the cumulative sales under a scenario with consistent internal training significantly outpace both one-time external training and simply doing nothing. The growth isn't just linear, it actually compounds over time.
Wow, compounding growth.
And as the source points out, you don't necessarily need to pull your absolute best performer either. Just focusing on training in specific, discrete skills like effective cold calling techniques, negotiation strategies, or how to close deals can have a really significant impact across the team.
This really sets the stage for looking at how some companies are already putting this into practice, and the source shines a spotlight on Google again with their G2G or Googler to Googler program. Have you heard much about that?
Oh yeah, G2G. Google provides a fantastic real-world example of how to leverage internal expertise effectively and at a significant scale. The numbers were quite remarkable, actually.
Go on.
Back in 2013, over 2,000 Google employees voluntarily taught more than 2,200 different courses.
2,200 courses.
There were over 110,000 attendees within the company. Just think about the sheer volume of knowledge sharing happening there.
That's incredible. And what's particularly interesting is that These G2G courses are often short, entirely voluntary for both the teachers and the attendees.
Right, voluntary is key.
And they're hyper-focused on practical skills and sharing specific knowledge. It's not about these long, mandatory training sessions that people might dread. It's about Googlers teaching other Googlers what they know best and what's immediately useful.
Exactly. And the source highlights some really fascinating examples of these courses. There's one called Mind-Body Awareness, taught by Amy Colvin.
Okay.
It's a quick 30-minute class using Qigong and meditation techniques to help Googlers reduce stress and improve focus. Then there's Presenting with Charisma by Adam Green, focusing on tangible ways to improve presentation skills, body language, cutting down filler words like, and
We could all use that.
probably. And even I2P, which stands for Intro to Programming for Non-Engineers, taught by Albert Huang. That gives people basic programming skills they can then directly apply in their jobs at Google, even if they aren't engineers.
That's really practical. And it's not just these formal courses, right? They also have these peer support programs.
That's right. There's the Tech Advisor program where experienced leaders volunteer to offer confidential one-on-one support to other Googlers.
Confidential support.
Yeah. Chi-Chu, who was involved, described it as less about giving direct advice and more about actively listening, making connections, and helping individuals figure out their own solutions to challenges.
Like coaching almost.
Right. Kind of, yeah. And then there's the Career Guru program, where Googlers volunteer to provide career guidance and advice to their colleagues. Becky Cotton, involved in launching it, noted the huge demand within Google for this kind of internal mentorship and support.
That makes sense. People want to learn from those who've walked the path.
Exactly. It really speaks to the value people place on learning from those within their own organization who have already navigated similar career paths.
What seems so smart about these G2G initiatives is that it creates a real win-win situation.
How so?
Well, the learners gain valuable practical skills directly from colleagues with hands-on experience, right? And the Googlers who teach or advise actually develop their own leadership, active listening, and empathy skills in the process.
Ah, that's a great point. The teacher learns too.
It fosters this culture of continuous learning and knowledge sharing from the ground up, rather than solely relying on top-down directives or, expensive external folks.
Exactly. It's about tapping into the collective intelligence and experience that already exists within the organization and just creating channels for that knowledge to flow freely.
Okay, so now we've talked a lot about the importance of effective learning and how it can happen, but how do you actually know if it's making a difference?
The measurement question, always tricky.
Right. The source delves into this often tricky topic of measuring the impact of learning initiatives. It mentions that for over 40 years, HR professionals have often relied on this 70210 rule.
Oh yeah, 70210.
0.70% of learning happens on the job, 20% through coaching and mentoring, and only 10% through formal classroom training. Have you encountered this rule much?
Absolutely. It's a widely cited rule of thumb in HR circles. However, as the source rightly points out, there's a surprisingly significant lack of rigorous evidence to actually scientifically support that 70210 breakdown.
Really? No solid evidence?
It's become something of a widely accepted piece of conventional wisdom, maybe, but without a strong empirical foundation backing those specific percentages.
Interesting. So instead of relying on that, the source introduces us to Kirkpatrick's 4 levels of evaluation as a much more robust and evidence-based framework for measuring training effectiveness. Can you walk us through those 4 levels?
Certainly. Kirkpatrick's model proposes 4 distinct levels. Level 1 is reaction.
Reaction. Okay.
This essentially measures how the participants felt about the training. Did they like it? Did they find it engaging? Was the content relevant? The smile sheets.
Got it. Level 2.
Level 2 is learning. This goes a step further and assesses the extent to which participants actually acquired the intended knowledge, skills, and attitudes. This is often measured through tests, quizzes, maybe skill demonstrations.
Okay, that makes logical sense so far. You want to know if people enjoyed it and if they actually learned something on paper? What about levels 3 and 4?
Right. Level 3, and this is often the most critical but also the most challenging to measure accurately, is behavior.
Behavior change.
Yes. This level looks at the extent to which participants actually changed their behavior on the job as a direct result of the training. Are they applying the new skills day to day?
That seems key.
It is. And finally, level 4 is results. This focuses on the tangible business outcomes that resulted from the training. Think increased sales, improved efficiency, higher customer satisfaction, fewer errors, the bottom line impact.
It really seems like assessing that level 3, the actual change in behavior,
Hmm.
is where a lot of organizations maybe struggle or just don't focus enough.
I think that's fair to say.
It's one thing for someone to say they enjoyed a training session or even pass a quiz right after,
Hmm.
but it's an entirely different thing to observe sustained changes in how they actually perform their job weeks or months later.
Exactly. Accurately assessing behavior change takes time and effort. You need to allow sufficient time for the learning to be integrated and consistently applied.
Right. It's not instant.
And the source also discusses the powerful methodology of using control groups to truly measure the impact.
Control groups, like in science.
Precisely. By comparing the outcomes of a group that received the training with a similar group that did not, you can gain a much clearer, more objective understanding of the training's effectiveness and isolate its impact from other factors that might be influencing performance.
So as we bring all of this together, what would you say are the key overarching principles for an organization that genuinely wants to transform itself into a true learning institution based on what we've unpacked from the source material?
Well, the source really distills it down to three core principles that stand out clearly.
Okay, 3 keys.
First, prioritize and actively engage in deliberate practice. Break down complex skills and knowledge into small, digestible components, ensure clear and immediate feedback is provided, and encourage repeated practice with correction and experimentation.
Deliberate practice. Got it. Number 2.
Second, recognize and empower your internal expertise. Have your best people, those who are actually doing the work successfully every day, take on the role of teachers and mentors. Their practical, context-specific knowledge is often the most valuable asset you have.
Use your internal stars. Makes sense. And the third.
And third, and perhaps most fundamentally, commit to investing only in learning initiatives and courses for which you can actually demonstrate a tangible change in people's behavior and ultimately in the organization's results.
Prove the impact.
Exactly. Focus relentlessly on measuring the real-world impact, not just superficial metrics like attendance or smile sheets, but on whether they lead to concrete improvements in how people actually do their jobs.
So to wrap things up then, it seems clear that building a true learning institution isn't just about throwing money at external training programs or hitting some target for training hours.
Definitely not.
It requires a fundamental shift in how an organization thinks about learning, moving from just delivering content to actively cultivating continuous learning, recognizing and elevating the expertise that already exists within its own walls, emphasizing deliberate and focused practice, and rigorously measuring the real-world impact on both individual behavior and overall organizational results.
And it's crucial for you, our listener, to recognize that these principles aren't exclusive to massive corporations like Google.
Good point.
Regardless of the size of your organization or your specific role within it, you can begin to think strategically about how to identify and leverage internal experts around you, foster opportunities for peer-to-peer learning and knowledge sharing, and proactively seek out feedback to continuously improve your own learning and development,
Take ownership.
as well as contribute to a more learning-oriented environment for those you work with.
That's such an important takeaway. And it leads us to a final, maybe provocative thought from our source. It suggests that in a very fundamental way, everyone teaches and every child learns. Perhaps the real key to building a truly effective learning institution is simply to tap into and nurture that inherent human desire and capacity to both learn and share knowledge that already exists within every single person in your organization.
Just let people do what comes naturally.
Right. Will we truly embrace that inherent human drive? That's certainly something to really consider as you think about your own learning and the learning culture around you. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.